On today's show, Warriors or Grizzlies? Who's the better matchup for your Houston Rockets in the first round of the NBA playoffs? We'll go through some of the pros and cons of both teams and come to our final conclusion of who we'd like to see in the first round. It's all coming up right here at Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What's up and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. I'm also the host of Locked On NBA Thursdays. Be sure to follow along wherever you listen to your podcasts or on YouTube. Just search Locked On Rockets, where the best way you can help us grow our show is to listen every single day on a podcast platform of your choosing. Like, comment, subscribe on YouTube. Also, check out our Locked On Rockets newsletter. Would sincerely appreciate all of that support. And as always, thanks so much for making Locked On Rockets part of your day every single day, whether it's on your way to work, on your lunch break, in the gym. Thank you so much for being an everydayer. Joining us now is the podfather himself, Rockets Wire editor and host of the Logger Line podcast, Ben DuBose. You can track down on Twitter at Ben DuBose. Here's we break down the two potential opponents for the Houston Rockets in the first round of the playoffs, potentially either the Golden State Warriors or the Memphis Grizzlies. And to navigate today's episode, we're going to spend one segment kind of looking at the pros and cons of the Warriors as the Rockets opponent, and then one segment looking at the Grizzlies and the pros and cons there. And then in the final segment of our show, we're going to kind of come to our conclusion on who we think is the ideal first round matchup for the Rockets. So Ben, let's go ahead and start things off with our good old friends, the Golden State Warriors. Let's start with pros for when it comes to facing the Warriors. And we can go back and forth and, take turns, however we want to do this. What stands out to you as a positive in potentially facing the Warriors in the playoffs?
I think the positive is that it's a very good matchup for the Rockets defensively, and that's the strength of this team. We know all year long they've been a top 5 defense, a fairly mediocre offense. Alperen and Sengun basically said as much after the finale Sunday against Denver. And when you look at the 5-game sample, which is not insignificant, you had the 4 scheduled game plus the NBA Cup quarterfinal. The Warriors had an offensive rating of 103 against the Rockets, which would be dead last among the 30 NBA teams for the overall season. And honestly, it's even worse than that if you look at the last 4.5 games and the way the year actually progressed. If you remember that first game against the Warriors back at the very beginning of November, the Rockets fell behind by 30 in the first half, then rallied to force overtime, ended up losing. But they were down, I think, something along the lines of 70-40, something in that ballpark at the half. There was no Steph Curry in that game, and the Rockets really struggled with the ball movement, the player movement. They made some changes at the half. They were excellent defensively over the ensuing 29 minutes. And then that carried over into the next 4, many of them with Steph Curry, and the last 2 with both Steph Curry and Jimmy Butler. So this is a team that I think the Rockets match up well against defensively because they're fairly disciplined, they're well coached. So a lot of the things the Warriors like to do in terms of the ball and player movement, they don't work quite as well against the Rockets as they do against most teams. We know what Amen Thompson in particular can do against Steph Curry, held him to 3 points on 1 of 10 shooting, career low when playing at least 30 minutes the last meeting. And for all that's been said about the Warriors having a mental hold on the Rockets, I think they have a mental hold over Rockets fans, but I don't think they do over this particular Rockets team, which has now won 2 of the last 3 meetings. The one loss was a close one right before the All-Star break on night 2 of a back-to-back when the Rockets were on fumes and they're playing Nate Williams and Jayshawn Tate down the stretch of that game. So I know the baggage over the years. I know the 15-game losing streak that was a thing late in 2024, but the last 3 meetings have been tilted towards the Rockets. Overall, the Rockets had defended very well against Golden State. And if you subscribe to the theory that in the playoffs you want to put the best part of your team in the best place to succeed, for a Rockets team that's built around defense, this could be a good matchup.
Yeah, I look at it, first off, I agree with the sentiment about the defensive stuff, and especially in particular how Amen Thompson has looked guarding Steph Curry. Just basically completely eliminated him from the game the last time these two teams played against each other. And even outside of that last matchup, which was spectacular defensively from Amen Thompson, the previous 2 matchups, Steph has kind of struggled against the Rockets. The game before that, he shot just 7 of 17 from the floor, did get to 27 points, but poor efficiency to get there. And then the game before that, only 19 points on 17 shots. So the Rockets have actually done a decent job defending Steph this season when he's been available and in action. One thing that stands out to me about a potential Warriors matchup is they are a very small team. They do not have a lot of size. They like to run Draymond Green, those kind of extended minutes sometimes at the 5 is kind of their curveball lineup to throw out there. And then you've got Jimmy, downsized all the way at the 4 potentially. They haven't been using Kevon Looney a lot. Like he's kind of like fallen out of the rotation a little bit. I think that could be a really big advantage for the Rockets in seeing how their size and physicality has been a pretty significant strength at various points this season, especially with the double big lineup and the effectiveness there between Steven Adams and Alperen Sengun. The Warriors don't have a counter to that. They don't have a lineup that they can go to or that they've gone to with any regularity here in the regular season with like Kevon Looney and like a second big out there or Kevon Looney and Draymond Green. I don't think that lineup would be able to, I guess, deter the Rockets from what they're trying to do with their double big lineup. And if you had to ask me in a vacuum who I like, whose chances I like better, Adams and Sengun on the floor versus Kevon Looney and Draymond Green, I'm very much favoring the Adams Sengun lineup. And I'm taking my bias out of this. I just think that those two guys would be able to kind of impose their will and their physicality on any kind of a game, and the Warriors just won't have an answer for it.
And this is not the Warriors of old where they've been able to play traditional centers off the floor the way they could when the current group was in their 20s. And you also had Andre Iguodala out there. Alperen Sengun has been able to hold his own against Draymond Green. We know late in that NBA Cup quarterfinal, he had the big bucket in the final 30 seconds to set up the finish. He had the pick that freed Fred VanVleet for the 3. We know what he did last game in San Francisco when the Rockets, they were up 16 with a minute left in that game. They won that with ease on the road, and we know how Sengun responded to that chippy sequence with Draymond. So even if the Warriors like to play small, they are not nearly as effective as they were in their heyday in the 2010s at playing traditional bigs like Alperen Sengun, like Steven Adams off the floor. Now, with that said, they are a good defensive team, and while I note that Golden State's offensive rating against the Rockets would be the lowest in the NBA, the downside is so would the Rockets' offensive rating against the Warriors. These games have been slugfest. So it is going to be a challenge for the Rockets offensively in an area where they're not good. So in some ways, playing against the Warriors, it makes your strength stronger, but it also makes your weakness weaker. And so it's sort of a battle of extremes there. But by and large, in the last 3 meetings, it's led to a net positive for the Rockets. And I don't think, honestly, when you look at how those games played out, it's not like they're playing Sengun off the floor and then the Rockets are struggling offensively because their all-star isn't able to stay on the floor. No, by and large, the Rockets just haven't made shots over those 5 games at the level they typically do. And so that leads me to believe that some of the offensive struggles are going to normalize as the sample increases. Jalen Green in particular, until that fourth quarter in San Francisco, had really struggled against the Warriors. Hopefully he's due to turn things around. But I just think that when you look at Sengun's ability to stay on the floor and you look at the shooting data, I think some of the Rockets' struggles offensively against the Warriors would likely correct in a larger sample.
Yeah, and on the flip side of that, the Warriors side of things, they just, I mean, this is maybe another pro for the Rockets here is I just don't see how they're going to get enough offense outside of Steph and Jimmy. And Jimmy even has not looked, he doesn't look like playoff Jimmy. He doesn't look like Miami Jimmy. He's been a lot more hesitant to shoot the basketball. He's not nearly as aggressive at times. And so I feel like if the Rockets are able to replicate what they did in that final game of the regular season against the Warriors and effectively remove Steph Curry from the equation, I like the Rockets' chances of letting Podziemski and Buddy Hield and Jimmy Butler try to be the guys to beat you in a 7-game series. They might do it once or twice and win a couple of games, but I don't think you can do that. If you can effectively take Steph out of the equation, then the Warriors are going to struggle mightily.
And we talked about this at Toyota Center when we were watching the finish Sunday, to that Clippers-Warriors game. It was staggering just how much more difficult it was for the Warriors to generate offense. Basically, everything was built around misdirection, and we know what Draymond can do as a facilitator, a hub in the high post, and trying to, free up Steph Curry coming around a maze of screens. but there weren't really a lot of ways for Golden State to generate advantages offensively, especially with a more timid Jimmy Butler. In contrast to the Clippers, where it felt like they always had the Warriors on their toes because you had Kawhi, you had James Harden, you had Norman Powell, who's had a fantastic year, you had Zubac, who's had a fantastic year. And so the Warriors just looked so much more limited in terms of how they could generate their offense. And you combine that with a Houston team that has super athletic guys like Amen Thompson and Tari Eason to defend against Steph Curry. You can throw Dillon Brooks in there for stretches as well. And even though the Warriors will set all these screens, well, if you're the Rockets and you have 3, 4, even 5 guys on the court at a given time that are capable of holding their own in the perimeter, you can set all the screens you want. And even if you force a switch, okay, well, if the other guy can hold up, you're still going to be fine. And so it's not all good against the Warriors. I'm sure before the pod wraps, we'll talk about, some of the concerns, which is definitely the experience side of things. They have a ton. The Rockets don't have much, so they might be able to overcome it, especially if it gets late in the series and it's just a one-game winner-take-all type situation, the same way we saw the Warriors do in Game 7 at Sacramento a couple of years ago. But on paper, I like the matchup for a Rockets team that is good defensively, that is held up against the Warriors, and a Golden State team that has looked increasingly limited offensively in terms of their ability to generate one-on-one advantages. I like the way it sets up for the Rockets.
Yeah, that is one major downside here is, and this is going to be an argument against the Rockets all postseason long. All the talking heads are going to be using it. Youth, right? Inexperience. They haven't been there. They haven't been in a playoff atmosphere. This Warriors team has. With the caveat, their big three has been there for sure. A lot of their supporting cast hasn't been, though. A lot of their supporting cast doesn't have extended playoff experience, hasn't been there in the big moments. And so it's kind of a weird, situation for the Warriors where they're, the top heavy, their top end guys. Yes, they've got the experience, but I also look at that as kind of potentially a benefit to the Rockets, right? This is an older Warriors team. They're older, they're slower. They've been around the block a couple times. Yeah, like Jimmy might be injured. That's a big one, right? Like if Jimmy's not 100% going into the postseason. Absolutely. And this is the other biggest one, and this is one that I'm not looking forward to dealing with the Warriors or potentially with the Lakers in a second round series down the line. The officiating, it's gonna be awful, and I can already feel it and see it now. Steve Kerr was already complaining about the officiating after the final game of the regular season against the Clippers, and talking about how teams have been physical with Steph all season and grabbing and holding him, and he's already working it up right now. He's doing his work ahead of time, ahead of whatever potential first round series the Warriors get, whether it's the Rockets, whether it's the Thunder in the 1-8 matchup. And that's going to be the unfortunate downside against playing against this Bay Area team, is dealing with officials, right? Officials have always been a part of the narrative whenever it comes to Rockets Warriors over the years, unfortunately.
Although the Rockets are getting very used to playing this Golden State team. That's one other advantage, I would say. They played 5 times this year, including the meeting earlier this month that had big stakes for both teams. They played them, even though it didn't go well, in that game at the end of last season that basically kick the Rockets out of postseason contention. Mm-hmm. So you're looking at 6 meetings over the past year, and several of them in very high-profile settings. We know that game April a year ago, the Rockets built up as basically their own playoff game. We know the NBA Cup game. We know the meeting in San Francisco earlier this month. So the Rockets are used to many of these factors with the Warriors. So I think especially for an older Golden State team that doesn't have the athletic advantages they once did, they are very dependent on, as mentioned earlier, misdirection, beating teams between the ears. And so I think the Rockets, they are well coached, but in addition to being well coached and good defensively in general in terms of talent, I also think letting them hone in on Golden State specifically and being very experienced at playing them, again, 6 times in high leverage spots over the past year, and then potentially going into a best of 7, many of the advantages that Golden State depends on to sort of overcome their lack of athleticism, their lack of creation, it might not hold up against a Rockets team that's getting very used to certainly the officiating, but everything that comes with Golden State officiating just being part of that package.
Coming up, we're going to talk about the pros and cons of a potential Memphis Grizzlies matchup in the first round. And then after that, we will get to our kind of final conclusion of who we'd like to see in the first round for the Houston Rockets. We're going to get there in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by Hungry Root. Look, spring is here and life is busier than ever between work, family, playoffs, everything in between. Who has time for grocery shopping and meal prepping? That's why I choose to use Hungry Root. It makes eating healthy, delicious meals simple and stress-free. Hungry Root is like having your own personal shopper and nutritionist wrapped into one. They take care of grocery shopping and meal planning, offering personalized recommendations based on your tastes and different health goals. Honestly, Hungry Root is awesome. It tailors my orders based on what I liked or what I didn't love. It gets smarter every single time with their high-quality, nutritious food. You can stick to your gut-friendly, high-protein diet without spending hours of planning. The meals come together in 15 minutes or less, giving you more time for whatever you want, whether it's watching games, spending time with family, your significant other, all that stuff. Take advantage of this exclusive deal. Get 40% off your first box, plus a free item in every box for life. Go to hungryroot.com/LockedOnNBA and use code LockedOnNBA. That's hungryroot.com/LockedOnNBA, code LockedOnNBA for 40% off and a lifetime free item. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast, home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. All right, Ben, this Grizzlies team, as we're looking, first off, I feel like everybody's writing off this Grizzlies team. I know they're kind of in a tailspin. They've been struggling. They fired Taylor Jenkins, and it's like they're the least stable of any franchise that's currently vying for a spot. I mean, not including like the Mavericks and stuff, but like of the teams that are projected to likely be in the 1 through 8 playoff bracket in the West, they're the least stable of all the teams, right? Everybody's been, painted the Grizzlies as, that's the team we want to face in the first round. And on paper, I think, the Rockets have done pretty well against this Grizzlies team, and they've largely played them at relatively full strength throughout most of the season. They went 3-1 against them. In the one game that they did lose, they lost, and the Rockets themselves weren't 100%. And on top of that, they lost by 1 point that final game, was it? Yeah.
Rockets led most of the way, and Sengun didn't even play.
There you go. So matchup-wise, on paper, the Rockets and Grizzlies, that would probably be a pretty favorable matchup, all things considered, if you look at least the regular season sample size of this past year.
And what stood out to me about the 2 games in January that the Rockets won against Memphis was that those were 2 games in which the Rockets had to execute in the second half to get those wins. We know a lot of games this year, the Rockets have struggled in the half court to generate offense when it really mattered. Those 2 wins against Memphis in January were 2 games where they absolutely did. They delivered. And so when you look at the Rockets-Grizzlies matchup and compare it to Rockets-Warriors, it's on the other end of the spectrum. It's just, I mentioned the Warriors series would be a slugfest. The Houston offensive rating against Golden State and Golden State's offensive rating against Houston in 5 meetings this year would both be the lowest in the league. Conversely, the Rockets' offensive rating against Memphis has been 118.5, which would be top 5 in the league. So they have been really good overall and in those high-pressure situations. So I think some of it comes down to, do you want to mitigate a weakness or do you want to enhance a strength? If you play against Memphis, you are mitigating a weakness, in that we know the question for this Rockets team is, how good can they be offensively? Do they have the A1, the alpha? Well, against Memphis, they played all year long at a very high level offensively. I think the Rockets like that matchup. Against Golden State, they have not, but the defense has been even better. The defense has gotten to an elite level. So I think some of it just comes down to philosophically, do you want to boost a strength or enhance a weakness? And Memphis allows you to sort of enhance one of your weaknesses. And I think that's true in terms of tactical X's and O's strategy, in terms of how the Rockets execute on offense. I also think in terms of the playoff questions, playing Memphis mitigates one of the big concerns for this Rockets team, which is the mental side of the game. If you're going up against a team like the Warriors, what you worry about, and we laid this out at the end of the first segment, is the lack of experience. The Warriors, at least with their big 3, have been there, done that. The Rockets haven't. And so there's a lot of internal belief for guys like Steph Curry, Draymond Green, and certainly Jimmy Butler, that they're going to be able to figure things out. You're not going to rattle them. The Memphis Grizzlies, who just went through a coaching change less than a month before the playoffs, that's going to be a mentally fragile team. Not saying that they're not justified in making the move they did. If you've decided to move on, you may as well get data under a different coach. But at a high level, what that tells you is the organization does not have confidence that the status quo is likely to work out. And of course, the team can read between the lines on that. So if you're going up against Memphis and you're the Rockets, if you can take an early lead in the series, you might be able to sort of get them into Cancun mode, to get them questioning themselves a little bit in a way that, like, let's say you go up 2-0 in the Warriors, there's not going to be any panic. They're going to go home to San Francisco and think they can win 2 games and get it right back tied at 2 going into a best of 3. Memphis, you might can rattle. So I think it's one of those things with the Rockets. The big questions going in are the lack of experience and the mediocre offense. If you play Memphis, you're boosting those weaknesses to a more passable level. That's the case for the Grizzlies.
And honestly, too, a couple other things to note here when it comes to Memphis. First off, I think stylistically, this is a series that a lot of people are expecting the Rockets and the Grizzlies both to kind of struggle once they get to the postseason, because they're two teams that have they relied very heavily on attacking in transition and generating those fast break opportunities. Because the Rockets and Grizzlies styles do mirror each other a little bit in that regard, that could be one area where you don't experience that drop off until potentially the next round, right? Playoffs, it's still going to slow down for both teams a little bit. But if you're playing against another team with a similar style, then that's going to be less of a, I guess, shock to the system for the Rockets, and suddenly not being able to generate any points in transition, or suddenly the game slows down too much. And it's just, a big wake up call for having to execute in the half court. So that's one thing to note. The other thing is the rookie for the Grizzlies, Jalen Wells, he was fantastic for them all year long. Him and Zach Edey, starting two rookies and being a relatively competent team. I guess, they didn't, achieve their own level of internal expectations or whatever, but he's out and he has a hand injury and he's not going to be around for the postseason. I forget if it was specifically listed as a season-ending injury, but I remember reading he's got like hand surgery or something around the court. So he's done for. And he was a big part of the Grizzlies' success this year. So them not being at full strength, not having him is going to definitely hurt them a little bit in any potential series with the Rockets. I will say one thing that does worry me a little bit is the size component of the Grizzlies. Talked about this with the Warriors, right? And I think the Rockets, they're the bigger, more physical team. Grizzlies are, it's a lot harder to be a bigger, more physical team than the Rockets. The Grizzlies might be able to make that happen.
Zach Edey and Jaren Jackson Jr. Yeah.
That is a pretty substantial duo in the front court to start games. And we know that one of the downsides of this new iteration of the Rockets lineup ever since Amen Thompson entered the starting lineup over Jabari Smith Jr., the Rockets have at times felt a little small sometimes with those starters out there. And it really makes me wonder, from a strategic standpoint, would Ime Udoka be willing and go so far as to start potentially Steven Adams in a series against the Grizzlies in order to counter Zach Edey and Jaren Jackson Jr.? Because the last couple times that we've seen Jaren Jackson Jr. against the Rockets with this iteration of the starting lineup, or I apologize, just the last time, because it was the previous matchups before that, I think Jabari was still healthy. But he had his way with Dillon Brooks. Dillon Brooks was the guy having to check Jaren Jackson Jr. And DB has given up about 6 inches of the height and a lot of muscle, a lot of size in that matchup, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think you've got to note that 3 of the 4 meetings against Memphis were in January when you did not have Jabari due to the hand fracture. And I think Jabari is a guy, and hopefully his groin will be right, because you will need his size and length against Jaren Jackson Jr. Dillon Brooks struggled in that matchup. I think Dillon is much better suited to guarding Desmond Bane, who, first off, when Dillon guards Bane, you can tell there's history between them dating back to Dillon's time in Memphis. And so that seems to bring out the best of Dillon anyway, when he faces one of those guys that he has a little bit of personal animosity with, even if he says it's all in fun. We know Dillon takes it to another level physically in those settings. I think Bane is also a guy who's, he's very skilled, but he's not the most explosive. So he can't really challenge Dillon in ways that some of the uber athletic guys can. So I think being able to stick Dillon on Desmond Bane, we know what Amen can do against Ja Morant. So the question, if you're going to play to those matchups, is who's going to guard Jaren Jackson Jr. And so that's where Jabari could have a big role. I also think playing a little bit more through Sengun so that you can get Zach Edey in foul trouble, that's something that you should definitely try to do. It happened in a lot of those matchups this year. Edey really struggled against Sengun. So if you can run some offense through Alpi and early in games, put that second foul on Zach Edey, that can go a long way potentially to mitigating those size concerns.
Yeah, that's definitely, again, the Jaren Jackson Jr. situation with him being able to, starting at the 4 and the size, playing alongside Zach Edey at the 5, or them playing, small with Triple J at the 5 spot. The Grizzlies have a bunch of different lineups that they can throw out at you in a bunch of different ways that they
Aldama
can play.
Off the bench was big in those games too. Yeah.
Stylistically, yeah, they can throw a fastball at you. So the Grizzlies present an interesting matchup, with those specific matchups in mind, or kind of conundrum, I guess, with those specific matchups in mind. The other thing here is Ja Morant, even though he's had kind of a down year relative to kind of his superstar status and whatnot, Ja is still very much an electric superstar in today's NBA, and dealing with him over the course of a 7-game series, we know that Amen Thompson has had some success guarding him. We know that he's held him to, like, I think it was like 33% shooting so far this season, and that's great. But I don't know, it just something about Ja in a 7-game series. He's one of those stars that shines brightest when the lights are in front of him.
Yeah, and I also think he'll challenge Rockets guys with nagging injuries. I mean, we know Amen will be the primary defender on him, and so hopefully Amen's ankle is good. But we know every team in the NBA forces switches, and so guys like Fred VanVleet and Jabari Smith, who have had their share of issues down the stretch of the year, you need your guys to hold up. Because the big difference in playing the Grizzlies versus the Warriors, and Ja Morant specifically, is that the Grizzlies will challenge you a little bit more physically with the speed and explosiveness of Ja, with the sheer size of Jaren Jackson Jr. and Zach Edey. With the Warriors, so much of the game is between the ears, in that, as we said earlier, they're not really going to challenge you too much from a creation standpoint. It's more how they move their players, how they move the ball. And so it's about being disciplined and honed in on your assignments, the scouting report. It's more about mental discipline, I would say. With Memphis, they are going to challenge you just simply, can you stay in front of them off the dribble? Can you get the rebounds and keep them off the offensive glass? And so with guys that have been hurt, I mean, the Rockets at full strength have the ability to do that. They are a very good defensive team, very deep. We know all of that. But they're going to be challenged. The Grizzlies will hunt whatever mismatch they think they can find. And in contrast to the Warriors, who are going to try and beat you mentally, I think the Grizzlies are going to try and beat you physically with athleticism. And so it's going to put a lot of pressure on your guys that have been, a little nicked up down the home stretch of the year. We know the Rockets got to rest them over the final week or so. Hopefully they're ready, because the Grizzlies will attack you athletically in a way that a team like the Warriors probably wouldn't.
Coming up, let's get to our final conclusion. Who do we want to see face the Houston Rockets in their first round playoff series? We're going to get there in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by OpenPhone. If you're running a business, you know that every missed call is money left on the table. Think about it. When was the last time you had a service emergency? If the first person didn't answer, did you wait? Probably not. That's why you need OpenPhone. OpenPhone is the #1 business phone system designed to streamline and scale your customer communications, all through an app on your phone or computer. You don't need to carry 2 phones. With OpenPhone, you can manage business calls and texts from one app, whether you're at your desk or on the go. They have a shared inbox. Your team can jump into any conversation without missing a beat. The AI call transcripts save you time on follow-ups and ensures that you never lose track of customer interactions. OpenPhone is offering listeners 20% off your first 6 months at openphone.com/lockedonnba. That's openphone.com, openphone.com/lockedonnba. And if you're switching from another service, OpenPhone will even port your existing numbers over at no extra charge. OpenPhone, no missed calls, no missed customers. And final segment here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast, home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. All right, Ben, we've laid out some arguments, some pros and cons for both the Warriors and the Grizzlies. We haven't been able to get into everything. It's only a 30-minute podcast. There's only so much ground that we can ultimately cover. But looking at the possibility, right, of one of these two teams for a first round series with the Rockets, kind of where are you sitting at? Where are you coming away with? Who do you think should be, who is your preferred opponent? Who do you think would line up best against the Rockets?
So it's funny. I feel like for a lot of this pod, I've been laying the groundwork for playing the Warriors. And I do think that it's a better matchup than the average Rockets fan thinks. However, I would personally still prefer to face the Grizzlies, because for me, it goes beyond the X's and O's. I think with the Rockets not having any previous playoff experience, having the intangible edge against a Memphis team that's going to be a little emotionally fragile, coming off the coaching change. They don't have a lot of their own experience. Well, they've been to the playoffs, but they certainly have not gotten deep into the playoffs the way the Steph Curry and Draymond Green and Steve Kerr-led Warriors have. I think there's less culture in Memphis compared to Golden State. And so for a Rockets team that's, not that they're absent or devoid of culture, but they're devoid of experience, most of them at a high level and certainly together, I would rather play the team that doesn't have as much experience. And I also think there's advantages to mitigating your weakness. The matchup against Golden State, the argument for that is it plays to your defense, which is already very good and it can make them great. Well, what I would argue is that I trust the Rockets defense. I trust Ime Udoka and Amen Thompson to be passable on that level, to be good enough on that level, no matter what. The bigger questions are on offense. And so looking at the 4 games against Memphis, it's not so much the record because, yeah, Rockets 3-1 against the Grizzlies, 2-3 against the Warriors. A lot of those games were early in the year, and the Rockets did win 2 of their last 3 against Golden State. So it's not so much that the winning percentages are what they are. It's more how the games have played out. And for a Rockets team that can get sticky, especially in the half court, the way games in the playoffs are often decided, the fact that they've been so consistently good against Memphis on the offensive side of the floor, and that it mitigates one of the big concerns, for me, the fact that you can address both the issues with experience and the issues with half-court execution on offense, that makes me lean Memphis.
Does your so I want to present a couple arguments here potentially. Does your answer change at all if you revisit and look at, I mean, the games that the Rockets played against the Grizzlies this season, they were, aside from the first one, which was a total blowout in favor of the Rockets, 128-108, right? They're all decided by very, very competitive, very close games, right? 119-115, the first win, 120-118, I guess the third win, sorry. So second win, third win. And then the final game decided by 1 point, 120-119 final score. Does that, I mean, seriously, either of those 2 other games that were Rockets wins, right? Couple things break differently. One shot goes in, one shot doesn't go in. Does that not worry you at all as far as how close these games have been from a competitive standpoint?
I mean, it worries me some, but the reality is that it's going to be a close series no matter what. I mean, we can talk about, the 2 seed versus the 7. But the reality is the Rockets won 52 games. Both of these 2 teams won 48. It's going to be close no matter what. And Golden State, a couple of games the Rockets lost. The one early in the year, they lost in overtime. The second one was close in the final minute. So it would be foolish to expect, in my opinion, a 4 or 5 game series, no matter who you play. I think it's likely to go 6-7 games, no matter if it's the Warriors or the Grizzlies. I think it's going to be close to a coin flip. So for me, I go into it expecting it to be competitive. I don't look at it being a mismatch because, it's the number 2 versus the number 7. So with that in mind, I'm looking at the little things on the margins. And so when I see the intangibles, I see the style of play being a bit more conducive to the Rockets offensively. I guess that's why I give a little more tie-breaking weight to those variables, because I just, you're right that those games against Memphis were pretty close. It's not like that they won in blowouts other than that one back in October. I just think it's going to be close no matter what.
I'm with you on that. That's a solid argument. I came into this thinking that I might actually walk away preferring the Warriors as a potential matchup because they really are so unproven outside of their big 3.
And it would be so fun to beat them. Come on.
It would be, again, from a narrative perspective. Yes, beating the Warriors would be incredible, and then that ushering the new age of Rockets basketball would be just chef's kiss. But at the same time, the flip side of it is losing to the Warriors would be god awful. Losing to the Warriors again in the first round of this new era of Rockets basketball would be the most depressing thing that's ever happened in Houston sports. I'm not, no hyperbole. Just that would be what, the 6th time in 10 years that the Warriors eliminated the Rockets from the playoffs. Yeah. Can't do it. Can't do it again. I don't even want to leave it as an option on the table. That said, you're right. I think some of the matchups there are interesting there against the Warriors. I actually have a strange amount of confidence going into either of these matchups, but I think I'm with you on leaning towards the Grizzlies matchup for all the reasons that we've kind of laid out here on the pod. And at the end of the day, I think that I trust Ime Udoka and the Rockets coaching staff to find different ways to, I think, exploit the Grizzlies, right? We know that they do not take care of the basketball. They turn the ball over a ton. That's not going to suddenly change in the postseason, right? Once you've played a certain way all season long, their style is what their style is. They are going to turn the ball over a ton in the postseason. That bodes well for the Rockets. It bodes well for their defense, and also as an extension to ignite their offense a little bit, right? To kind of give them some of those transition opportunities. The biggest question mark in a potential Grizzlies matchup would be, do we think the Rockets are going to, change up their starting lineup to match up the Grizzlies size? Are they going to just elect to have Dillon Brooks guard Jaren Jackson Jr.? There are some questions for that potential matchup. So I think we're in the same camp. We both want Grizzlies. What's up? What you got?
No, I was just going to say one last variable to keep in mind. During the season, the Grizzlies had 21 road wins. The Warriors had 24. And I think that ties into the experience or lack thereof. The Warriors are not going to be fazed by potentially playing a game 5 or a game 7 on the road. They have been there, done that before. So that just goes into the larger point for me, which is that if it's going to be a coin flip or close to it, no matter what, if you're going to have to execute late in a series, even if we can make the case that over 7 games, Steph Curry, Draymond Green, they're not as good as they once were, well, they can be as good in a given game. I mean, we saw that against the Clippers.
In a given moment, not even a given, just one moment, one possession.
It was just staggering watching that Clippers-Warriors game, and that it felt like the Clippers collectively were so much better. Yet in that fourth quarter, with the crowd egging him on, Steph Curry almost won that game by himself. And so even if he's 36 years old, whatever he is now, and has, more tread on the tires, if it gets to a game 5 or a game 7 on the road, he can put that team on his back in a given game, even against Amen Thompson. Look what he did against the Clippers, who have plenty of good defenders. He can do things that no one on Memphis can. And so because of that, if it's going to be close, and, we know the Rockets, because they got home court advantage, if it's, game 5 tied at 2, game 7 winner take all, those games are going to be inside Toyota Center. Rockets have, 12-3 since the All-Star break, but really 12-2. I don't count that Denver game. Your edge is much more pronounced against Memphis there as well. So I just think there's lots of little thing advantages that go your way against Memphis that may not quite as much go your way against Golden State.
And we spent this whole podcast looking at pros and cons and revisiting how the Rockets played against both these squads in the regular season. Unfortunately, none of that matters because these two teams have to face each other in that single elimination game. Who do you think comes out on top, Ben? Not who do you want. Who do you think wins?
I'm going to be a homer, but I'm going to say Grizzlies. I really have talked myself into this just because I think the Warriors emptied the tank. Physically, we know Jimmy dealing with the quad bruise with, of all people, it's James Harden that got him. So perhaps James Harden doing solid for his old team in Houston. But beyond just the physical toll for Jimmy in particular and that quad bruise and a 48-hour turnaround, I just think collectively, we heard Steph Curry say before that game that they were going to treat it, and he wanted the fans to treat it like a game 7. They put their heart and soul into that game. Steph Curry's got the bad thumb. When he went down, he wasn't even using his right hand to help him get back up off the floor. That's how limited he was. And so for an older team that treated it like a game 7, put everything into it, to then get off the mat 48 hours later, I don't know, against a Grizzlies team that has a lot of athletes that got to rest on Sunday. I like the Grizzlies in this spot, especially because the Warriors know even if they lose that game, they do still have another one in which they'd be a heavy home favorite against the Kings or the Suns. So it's not quite an elimination game, although being on the side of the bracket of the Thunder is obviously more difficult. So I just think lots of little things are adding up, and the Ja Morant-led Grizzlies did beat the Warriors in a play-in game, a couple of years ago. So there's experience there as well. I just think Memphis finds a way because Golden State had to really empty the tank physically and mentally against the Clippers.
For what it's worth, Warriors are 3-1 against the Grizzlies this season, although only one of those matchups, I believe, featured Jimmy Butler. So we'll see. It's always weird, those mid-season trades. You don't get it a look at a team if the schedule's all lopsided or whatever, but it'll be very interesting to see what happens ultimately Tuesday night between the Warriors and Grizzlies, deciding who the Rockets will see in the first round. Who do you want to see in the first round as a Rockets fan? Let us know your choice in the YouTube comments. Do you want the Warriors? Do you want the Grizzlies? Let us know your thoughts on the matchups, all that good stuff. Ben, you know the drill. Let me know where to track you down at.
Yep, Ben DuBose, the Logger Line, the Rockets Wire on Twitter/X, and RocketsWire.usatoday.com for all your daily Houston Rockets news coverage.
And that's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Rockets. As always, thanks so much for checking out the show. Remember, the best way to help us grow our show is to listen every single day on a podcast platform of your choosing. Like, comment, subscribe on YouTube. Also, be sure to check out our Locked On Rockets newsletter. Would sincerely appreciate all of that support. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And we look forward to having you back right here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.